You should become familiar with the terms anti-natalist and natalist. I think you're going to hear them a lot over the next couple of years as our country struggles with its cultural identity and with our collapsing birth rates. To be fair, it's not just in America. Other countries, including Japan, South Korea, a lot of Eastern European countries, are seeing a decline in the number of children born to mothers each year. And it's not sustainable. Your country will collapse if you don't have the people to carry on your unique traditions, language, culture, politics, etc. In light of the recent bombing at an IVF clinic in California, you'll also hear the term anti-natalist more and more. Now, internet subcultures have been aware of this term. It's lurked in the background of a lot of online forums, but I think you'll hear it more and more in the context of child-free people. Now, I'm going to talk about these terms in their more extreme examples in America today, but I want you to start to recognize where in our culture these themes are cropping up in much more innocuous ways. So let's get into it. On May 17th, Guy Edward Bertakis detonated a car bomb outside a fertility clinic in Palm Springs, California. The 25-year-old was ultimately the only fatality, although others were injured. None of the IVF embryos inside the clinic were harmed, according to officials. Law enforcement ultimately linked Bertakis to online forums discussing antinatalism or pro-mortalism concepts. He was known to have YouTube videos where he talked about this, as well as talked about explosives. The motivation behind his attack is deemed to be this idea that he did not believe in procreation. He thought that you could not bring people into the world without their consent. This is an excerpt from NBC News. Investigators are focusing on social media posts made by the suspect, including a 30-minute audio recording, which they say supported anti-natalist views. While the posts and the recordings are still being verified, officials believe they reflect the ideology behind the bombing. Anti-natalism refers to the belief that no one should have children. The debate over children, if you should have them, how many you should have, is raging in America right now. And it's important because it decides the fate of the nation. If you don't have descendants, who carries on what you've built politically, socially, religiously, morally? And I think also the children and who they are born to decide the direction of our culture. In the extremes, anti-natalism and natalism are completely opposed, but I think it does blend on a spectrum. Most people are ultimately in the middle, I would say, leaning natalist. They believe they should have kids, maybe 1, 2, that's what we always hear. It's like the parent and the 2 kids. But we do have the rising child-free movement, or people who are opting not to have children. Now, it's a complex topic because we know that birth rates across the world, but definitely in America, are on the decline. This is an excerpt from an article titled "What's Behind the U.S. Birth Rate Decline? Experts Say It's Not Just Personal Choice," published on May 5th, 2025 by Northeastern Global News. Birth rates in the United States have been on the decline since 2007, with 1.6 births per woman over her lifetime, according to the latest statistics. Part of this is due to fewer teen pregnancies, said Mindy Marks, an associate professor of economics at Northeastern. But data suggests that women are not just having children later as they prioritize education or career, but are skipping parenthood altogether. There's a long list of reasons people might not have kids, from concerns over the amount of time they'd need to invest in parenting to worries over the future of the planet thanks to climate change and global instabilities. Others might defer because they can't afford to take the time off work, either financially or professionally. Some simply don't want children. But for many interested in having children, cost is a huge factor that can limit their plans. Not only are the basic needs like housing becoming increasingly expensive, but childcare needed in the early years can cost thousands of dollars a year. In my opinion, if we have a population, let's say the middle part of the spectrum on anti-natalist to natalist, who are already concerned about what it would look like for them to have children, not just for personal reasons, losing time, independence, but also generally, what kind of world are they bringing their kids into? Will they have the money to finance a happy life for their children? Having these two broad spectrums will really pull and create more of a polarization. And I think that long term is what we need to be on the lookout for. Personally, I'll tell you, I think you should have kids. I think families are great. I think babies are cute. And I think that the role that they play in your life as an individual and in our greater life as a society is important. It's just not something you can replicate through chosen family or strong friendships, both of which can be meaningful. I think the importance of understanding the anti-natalist movement and the natalist movement is to say long term, what are the forces that will pull people apart and make it more difficult to work through the problems that are deterring people from having children? Or what are the reasons why some people would opt not to have children? What is the fear there? So let's talk about the anti-natalist movement. After the car bombing last weekend, I was looking up this term because obviously I'm familiar with what it means generally, but how does it lay out philosophically for people who identify this way? And I came across this interview that I thought was really informative, done by the Soft White Underbelly on YouTube. And it talks to Amanda, who identifies as an anti-natalist. I want to play you a couple of the key clips that I think sort of sum up why someone would be drawn to the anti-natalist movement.
So tell me what antinatalism is.
Sure. So antinatalism, put as simply as I possibly can, is the belief that it is unethical to create new life. Now, there are many different types of antinatalism. There's many different types of antinatalists. There's a lot of different motivations for antinatalism. There's a lot of different reasons why people might find themselves to be some form of antinatalist. Antinatalism can apply to a great many things, and there's huge disagreements among antinatalists about all of those things. So most commonly, it is the belief that it's unethical to create new human lives, but this can also apply to animal lives as well, and it can also apply to creatures that might become sentient at some point, like the emergence of sentient machines. There's a whole form of antinatalism called anti-AI natalism. So if those machines were essentially to gain sentience, that we would see that as unethical, and those were our lives worth preventing.
And is your side of it particularly focused on humans?
I'm what is called a sentiocentric antinatalist, or a biocentric or a reverse biocentric antinatalist, which means that I'm for the non-existence of anything that has the possibility of feeling.
Really?
Yes.
So
I didn't interrupt you, but yeah, so my antinatalism would apply to not just humans, but to animals, to sentient machines, to anything that
dogs, cats, squirrels, frogs.
The whole kit and caboodle.
They should all go.
They should all go, yeah. But right now...
Why is it that you want animals that feel to be abolished?
Because I believe that one of the greatest products of life is the production of suffering. There's all of this incredible amount of suffering. That's basically one of the biggest things that life produces. Life is... but on the other hand, there's also... suffering sometimes motivates us to accomplish things. That's absolutely true. So once we're alive, we need suffering, right? Like suffering builds character. Mm-hmm. We need to know when we're in pain. Suffering can have all of this value. But the fact of the matter is, before we exist, we certainly don't need it. We're certainly not in need of any of that suffering. Before we exist, there's nobody there. Just like they're not in need of all of that suffering that might have some utility to us while we're alive, they also are not in need of any of the good stuff either. There's all of the positives, to have a good life. We're not, before we exist, we're not in need of any of that. And so to create a new being is to put that potential sentient being at great risk of a poor quality of life. We do that without consent. Now, I know what you're going to say. It's impossible to get consent of a non-existent being, but that's part of the point. That's the nature of consent. If you can't get consent, then you don't take those risks. You don't impose that harm. So I don't think that we really have I think that the impetus to procreate is really culturally built. What we want is to have sex. We don't have an instinct to have children. We have a cultural sort of mandate and a lot of pressure put on us.
If you go to the Soft White Underbelly's YouTube channel and watch the full interview, it's about 26 minutes long, you can hear some of the distinctions Amanda, the antinatalist, makes between people who are motivated because of environmental reasons, because of social reasons. I mean, she talks about pretty clearly her belief in preventing suffering, or at least being conscious of not wanting people to not be able to consent to suffering. I think in some ways it was hard for me not to listen to that interview and think of the people in my life who I know who say, oh, well, there's just too many people on the planet. It's all going to collapse. So I just don't think I should have children. I couldn't bring children into this world. And to me, that is effectively light antinatalism. You have this spectrum. Let's say the middle is people who don't know what they want to do, and you can creep more towards antinatalism, let's say, with the idea that like, oh, well, it's okay for you guys, but I'm not going to do it. Oh, well, I really probably think people shouldn't because, the environment, because of climate change, whatever. And eventually, I think, especially if you were, let's say radicalized online, you could reach full, nobody should do it and I should be the one to enforce it, a la the car bomber. On the other end of the spectrum, you have natalism. So if you're in the middle and you say, I don't know what I want to do, but I think I maybe want to have kids. I think that's where most people are. They're open to the idea. Now, of course, there are people, let's go with, if you're watching the latest season of The Handmaid's Tale, right? Who are like, it is our moral obligation to have children, have as many as possible, and I think we should potentially even mandate it. That seems kind of intense to me. That seems like a violation of personal liberties. You have another end of the spectrum where there are people who think large families are good in light of birth rate decline, in light of cultural needs for change. And this, to me, similar to the anti-natalist, is motivated by a couple different things. So let's talk about natalism. Often in the news, you'll hear things like family values or pro-family ideas. And of course, this is often when you hear the debates around the cost of childcare, the cost of healthcare, maternal mortality rates. People come up against these ideas of, well, if you're pro-family, why don't you support X policy? If you're pro-family, then you should institute these things. And I'm not here to talk about the policies behind it, although I'd be happy to do a video like that in the future. For this video, I just want to talk about forms of natalism that we see in modern America. So if you were to sit down and Google pro-natalist, you might come across this couple. This is an article from Daily Mail. Elite couple breeding to save mankind insist they are not trying to perfect the human race despite using embryo selection. We just want to give our kids the best possible roll of the dice. So Simone and Mark Collins are a couple who, from what I understand, made a lot of money in Silicon Valley, moved to Pennsylvania, and have set out a goal of having a lot of children. But they rely on IVF, in vitro fertilization, to genetically screen their children to give them what they say is the best shot in life. Again, this is from the Daily Mail article. They plan to have at least 7 children in total. The couple has used genetic testing to optimize trait. The article goes on to talk about these couple. They have a daughter, is their first child, and they specifically wanted to look for genes that are connected with resiliency and with decreased rates of anxiety for later in life. And they're saying, we want to bring lots of kids into the world, but also we want the kids to be have a genetic advantage to life, that they are not predisposed to some of the challenges that people face. Obviously we see a lot of reporting about teens with anxiety, depression, who feel isolated. Now, this is a very science-based approach to genetics. In this article, you can see that the Collinses have been called hipster eugenicists, a label they denounce. We don't think humanity can be perfected. We just want to give our kids the best possible roll of the dice. It's not the same thing as what you might see for like a trad Catholic, right? So I'm going to pull up a different article. So this article is from NPR in 2009, and it sort of talks about, to me, in a more extreme example of natalism or pro-natalism with a religious element. And this is the Quiverfull movement. So you might have heard of this from 19 Kids and Counting, the Duggar family. I believe they were involved in Quiverfull. It's a citation from a psalm that talks about, kids are the arrows, and the more that you have, the stronger warrior you are for God, essentially. And in this article, it interviews a family from Middle America, I believe they're from Michigan, who talks about the biblical mandate to have children, or essentially saying, we're going to let God decide how many children we have. I know, Catholics believe sometimes something similar. This to me feels like a little bit more extreme because, again, the famous depiction of 19 Kids and Counting, they have lots and lots and lots of children. And some people say that's not fair because how do you support all of those children? This article has the psalm. So it's Psalm 127. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are sons born in one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. And this is from NPR. Those in the Quiverfull movement shun birth control, believing that God will give them the right number of children. It turns out that's a lot of kids. And the couple the interview mentions when they got married, they didn't even want kids, but ultimately decided that it's something that they should trust to God. They, I think, have 8 kids in total. NPR talked to Nancy Campbell, who's they deemed a leader of the Quiverfull movement. She had published the book Be Fruitful and Multiply. This is from the NPR article. Campbell says, the womb is such a powerful weapon. It's a weapon against the enemy. Campbell has 35 grandchildren. She says she and her husband stopped at 6 kids, and it is her great regret. I think help. Imagine if we had had more of these children, Campbell says, adding, my greatest impact is through my children. The more children I have, the more ability I have to impact the world for God. You'll hear other commenters on maybe the more conservative side of the spectrum, or just people who are leaning right these days, talk about if one side of the political spectrum or one side of the cultural aisle doesn't have children, then obviously the other side has the advantage because they're passing down their traditions, their morals, their beliefs. Now, of course, we all know people who are raised in, let's say, a deeply religious family who are not practicing, they're agnostic, they're atheists. We know people who are born to very liberal parents who ultimately lean conservative, who vote Republican, who like Donald Trump, that kind of thing. It's not a guarantee, but statistically more likely the cultural moral that has the children are the ones getting passed down. People who have a religious belief and who raise their children in the religion are more likely to see that religion spread in their communities. This is effectively one of the reasons the Mormon church is growing so fast. In the NPR article, Nancy Campbell says, we look across the Islamic world and we see that they are outnumbering us in their family size, and that they are in many places and many countries taking over those nations without jihad, just by multiplication. Essentially, the people who have the children dictate the fate of the nation. And so if those people, let's say by immigration, don't share your cultural values, or just because your people have stopped procreating, whether that's because of infertility or by choice, it's whoever is left. Or in some cases, you'll see this in Eastern Europe, if they don't have enough people, the country just declines. It becomes so small that maybe their culture is not passed down and potentially could get erased. It's kind of sad and scary. Obviously, an anti-natalist would look at this and say, that doesn't matter. That's not the point, and who cares about these things? But if you're someone who believes in your faith or in your culture and tradition, or just generally wants to see your community grow, having children is a key component to that. And similarly to the debates over the efficacies or the practice of antinatalism, what you're supposed to do, how you live your life, natalism has some forks in its debate as well. Obviously, you might have noticed online there's a huge debate over IVF and whether you should have fertility treatments. A religious person might have objections to the creation of embryos that get destroyed. Somebody else might object to the cost. Somebody else might object to the fact that we even have to have fertility treatments at all because of infertility. It's complex. I don't have a clear answer on any of it. Obviously, I have my own personal feelings on some of these things, but long term, as each side of this debate, as the anti-natalists decide what the boundaries they're willing to impose on other people are, and what the natalists decide are the paths, the acceptable paths towards conceiving children, you'll see these themes played out in news across the country, across the world. So as you meet people who are on the fence about having children, I think you can probably start to identify where their values are aligning on their spectrum. That is in no way trying to say that someone who doesn't want to have children is the same thing as an extremist anti-natalist. Not at all. But thematically, the conversations we're having about how we view family and how we view life matter, right? If you have a friend who is thinking about having a family and is concerned about losing their career, being in their face and being like, that's dumb, you shouldn't think about that, that's not important, is not necessarily going to warm them up to feel more confident to have children. Similarly, if you have a friend who is leaning towards not having children because they feel like the world is messed up, being like, you're a bad person, you are part of the problem, isn't going to change their mind. I think understanding the spectrum of these viewpoints, obviously there are extremes, again, more people are in the middle, but understanding where these things diverge or where the concerns come from can help you have more productive conversations, no matter where you fall on the spectrum. I think that, again, personally, I think that people should have children. And I think we live in a culture that treats family like it's a burden and impossible and takes away from the individual. But it skips over why it's not just fulfilling for you, but fulfilling for the community and the country you're in. So all that to say, there are two extremes in this debate. They don't always overlap because of the sub-debates that go on underneath them, but you will hear it a lot going forward. I think this will become, especially over the next 5 years, a dominant conversation in American culture. And the more you are aware of the intricacies of it and the nuances, I think the better informed you are when you're reading different proposals, different legislations, and when you're consuming different content. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you for those of you who have subscribed. I'm really appreciative for all the support. If you're interested in this topic and want to hear more about it, just leave me a comment. If there's anything else you want to talk about, news related, let me know. I'm so grateful to have you guys all here. I love reading the responses. You can follow me on X. It's the same handle. And yeah, just keep in touch. Thanks.